Hello and welcome to Taking Liberties, episode 19 for season 5. My name is Lee. I am in WA. I'm joined by my two wonderful co-conspirators. We've got Vikas and we've got Zeev tonight.
G'day,
There is
hello.
massive libertarian conspiracy, and we're just, at the very
That's
middle
it.
of it.
And we're at
We're
the heart of
plotting to
it.
take over the world to leave everyone alone.
Yeah. Or just, I don't
That
know,
sounds about right.
do something nefarious, like, I don't know, something.
Well, current-
All the
should have
nefarious
planned that
things
better.
escapes me at the moment, which is
Yeah.
shows you how nefarious I am. I have so many options. This week, we're going to be talking about the really big news and some other big news. The big news being the Trump Kim Jong Un meeting in Singapore, and
Yes.
that's basically been the thing dominating the news the last couple of days. And we're also going to talk about sniffer dogs at New South Wales music festivals, and particularly about basically this completely unjust system where people are being kicked out of music festivals even when they're not found having drugs on them just because the sniffer dogs sit down. So we'll get to that second. But first, Trump and North Korea's leader Kim Jong Un met. They signed a document that mentioned denuclearization, mentioned a bunch of things. Gentlemen, what are your thoughts?
So meme magic is real. I have to open up with that. It's so I think I said it to you earlier, Lee, because Lee and I are both Warhammer 40k fans. And there's a race in Warhammer 40k called the Orcs, and the Orcs basically they have this technology that should not work, right? But it does.
By the power of belief, it works.
By the power of belief, it works, right? And it works because of this thing called the warp, and basically they create this warp field around them. And if enough of them believe something is true, this warp field makes it true.
Yeah.
So
and
it's
of
a bit
course,
like Tinkerbell and bringing back Tinkerbell to life through the power of clapping.
Clapping, yeah, similar sort of concept, and of course the color
Except
red
with
means
orcs
it goes
in
faster.
Warhammer. Yeah, go on. Yes.
But the point, sorry, I just had to explain that. But I
Same
get
thing.
like I was telling Lee,
Yeah.
Trump appears to be an orc warbot, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
Right?
He's
There's
being
just-
brought
he's
to
just
life through the power of belief.
No. I'm saying everything that he says, just through the power of belief, of all his supporters, just happens inexplicably. It shouldn't work. Like there is no reason. There is no reason Donald Trump tweeting on the internet should result in a peace talk whatsoever. It shouldn't result in signed documents. It shouldn't do anything.
Well,
right? It should be
I mean,
But
the Kims have always wanted to meet with the US president. I mean, they're not the ones who've been holding up meetings. It's always been the US president that said no. Which I'm not saying that's like a good thing. Like, I think it's probably a bad thing. I think talking is a good thing. But, generally speaking, like, the North Koreans are pretty... Like, I suspect there's going to be an awful lot of Donald Trump all over North Korea's news station for the next forever.
finally a new station that's pro-Trump.
I suspect that if the deep state, as much as that's actually a thing, but in sort of the bureaucracy and the sort of long-term members of the State Department, they would have been pulling their hair out when Trump said that he's going to meet with Kim Jong Un, and certainly,
Probably.
Trump has given Kim something he wants, which is I'm okay with. I think it's good for them to talk, but I mean I don't think it's like a miracle that it happened.
No,
So-
I'm not saying that it is. I'm just saying it's just the absurd way that it's gone to there. Like normally you would expect like bureaucratic elements doing a whole bunch of talking, like this. Their guys will talk and then our guys will talk and then it kind of just comes up in the middle. But no, this is tweets and meme magic. Effectively. I mean, Dennis Rodman was the mediator the first.
Yes.
So,
In Dennis we trust. Now, what I would say to that as well is politics is domestic.
Just want to pull your microphone to your face a bit more. I can't quite hear.
Sorry.
That's all right.
What I would add to that as well is that politics is, even foreign politics, is in some ways domestic. So if we look at the history of it, Trump started out by attacking North Korea via his tweets, right, or denouncing its leader, and then has created an accommodation or form of accommodation, it seems, by these peace talks with North Korea. Now, I'm not saying it's the only possibility, but one possibility is that this was pre-planned. He's created some political space, some breathing room for him to appear to be the person who's now bringing Kim Jong-un down to the table, so to speak, who's now, insulted Kim Jong-un enough to make it seem as if Kim Jong-un is,
willing to play ball.
Demeaned, willing to play ball, having been demeaned enough by the US president. Now, whether that, in a sense, the optics of the thing matter much more than the final deal entered into between the United States and North Korea. The important part of that deal is that it's a peace deal of some kind, sanctions are lifted, and that's the outcome that everyone will ultimately be happy with, right? And everything after that is details. Do the North Koreans keep nukes or not? I mean, well, they've had nukes for the last 20 years. Good indicator that they're not going to use them is that they haven't yet. So that's, to me, it's somewhat
they've been
red
using
herring.
it. They've been bombing their own territory.
Yeah, testing. I get it. The other comment I would make is, and this is being picked up on at the Marginal Revolution blog by Tyler Cowan, it's the meeting place that is so significant here as well. They've chosen to meet in Singapore. Now, Singapore is one of the most prosperous nations on earth. It's got free markets, and it's also got an authoritarian leader or regime in place. The point of the exercise, one point of the exercise, is to signal to Kim Jong-un that things can be radically different from what they are, right? People can be much more prosperous, but you can still have maybe a strong man in charge. You can open up things and still stay in power and still be safe, maybe, for lack of a better word. It's an assurance of sorts. Now, I'm not saying that's the whole story. I'm not saying that's the only reason they chose Singapore, but I think it's a factor that part of this is part of the talks is about opening up North Korea, which the North Koreans are keen to do, but they might also be a little afraid of what the consequences might be. So this is kind of a rolling tour. Look, you can have both. You can be a tyrant, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, people can be extraordinarily wealthy.
Yeah,
true. But one of the points.
I'm not saying that it's an induction into free market economics. It's just this kind of the setting is everything, so to speak.
Well, the bigger thing is the Donald Trump trade war thing that he's been playing on.
Yes.
North Korea is kind of pivotal to that entire vision. If you think about it, North Korea is effectively a Chinese vassal.
Yep.
Right. So the idea that America could rob China of one of its vassal states, right?
Yes.
And then basically you've created a ring of American.
It ties into that kind of anti-China mentality.
Yeah.
That, it's a zero-sum game. We've got North Korea on our side more so than on China's side now. Ergo, we've won in some sense against China, or against its bureaucratic states, and it's hard to kind of call that a win in a sense, because what is North Korea really worth? But I take your point, because that it may well be a factor in Trump's mind that he's encircling China with more people. But on the other hand, it's like, well, as I just said, what is North Korea worth? I mean, if that is his thinking, why?
It's a pretty tiny GDP.
I mean, it's also
exactly.
Like if you look actually at the statement, which is really, I mean, it's barely a page. It's maybe 2 pages at most.
Yep.
There's not a whole lot of detail, and I understand that like this is the first beginning, like this is the first talks.
Yeah,
there's more talks to come, which is good. Like I want them to talk.
Yeah.
Generally you don't meet with leaders you're about to start bombing, and so generally speaking, like I'm in favor of more talks, and so that's fine.
Yeah.
But like it's a very long road till you get to some sort of peace. I mean, it could be resolved quickly. If Donald Trump wanted peace with North Korea, he could have it. The question is, I don't think,
Yes.
I don't think he's necessarily going for that. Like, I don't think he's, maybe I'm being harsh on Trump, but he doesn't seem like the kind of guy that has a plan. Like, he's not the kind of guy that, I mean, I know everybody's talking about like Ford HS, but it all seems very haphazard.
I think people get. I'm inclined to agree with you. I don't think Donald's a long-term strategist.
Yeah.
Right. But that's
I think
not
he's
the
a
same.
domestic political strategist.
Yes.
I think I wouldn't put it past him to go through that slamming Kim Jong-un just to get into the table idea.
Yeah.
Particularly because it plays so well to the domestic press.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you've seen that video, but there's that video of Fox News condemning the very idea of meeting with North Korea under the Obama administration.
Yeah.
And now praising Donald Trump for raising it.
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons for that is because he created that political breathing room for himself by going to the lengths of condemning the Kim Jong-un administration.
I mean, Trump's also, he said, like, there's a video of him in the late 90s at a talk show saying, just get in the room with the North Koreans and discuss it. Like, if you've got nothing else to do, you might as well talk. Yeah. And also, I think back in the early 90s, or even the late 80s, him saying that, if you give him 90 minutes of preparation, he can end the Cold War. So, he's obviously a guy who looks at kind of the world and thinks, I can solve this if I just talk with these people.
He's a deal maker. That's how he sees himself.
Sure, but I don't think he's necessarily a person who thinks, okay, let's come up with a long-term strategic plan for the US that we're going to push forward to create a hegemony against the China. He's not that kind of person, I don't think.
No, he's not thinking about it as, and now...
No. So, you're confusing two things there. I think very much he's a big picture thinker, right? I think all he's ever done for his life.
I'm saying, sure, he's a big picture thinker, but not a long-term planner. He's not like,
I want to create
US global domination in a way that, like, actually requires him to put in consistent effort over, like a long-term plan that he has to push through. I think he's a guy, he's going to get in the room, think he's sorted a deal, and then go home and think, I've done a deal, and that's kind of the end of it. Which is why I'm skeptical this is going to go anywhere, because the North Koreans have been playing the US for decades now. Like, they are masters at this. Like, they have been stringing along the world with threats and with bluster and with deals. I mean, this is not the first time that the North Koreans have agreed to a deal to denuclearize and all the rest of this stuff. So, I mean, my thoughts, which I think I've said here and I've definitely said on my Facebook page, is that Kim Jong-un has nothing to fear from Donald Trump. Like, fighting a war with North Korea is disastrous. I mean, it would be a disaster for him, but it'd also be disastrous for the US. No one on the Korean Peninsula wants a war.
It's not on the agenda.
Yeah. So, like, I mean, if I was Kim Jong-un, I'd be extremely confident going into every meeting, because Donald Trump is not the kind of guy who does a lot of prep. He's not the kind of guy who's, like, reading every policy paper. If you go by media reports, which, could be true, could be not true. The guy basically spends 11 hours a day looking at cable TV. So he's not the kind of guy who's going to come into it with a really, solid, well-researched plan for all the failings of Obama. You're pretty confident the guy's done his reading, even if he's still full of shit. So, I mean, I think in the long term, this kind of makes me skeptical that anything's going to happen. But if something does happen, I'm going to be the first person to welcome it and praise Donald Trump for doing it.
I'd have to say, so one main difference that I think Donald Trump has from from previous presidents is, so previous presidents relied a lot on patronage to hand out their appointment position, right? Well, as Donald Trump is more nepotistic, right? He goes by what people, he goes by what people have done for him in the past, and what he's looking for, and what he looks for more than anything else is loyalty. So what I suspect is, it's more than likely that he's probably got people who are interested in this area, right? Like actually interested in this area, and also have done things for Donald in the past. And that would be the type of person he trusts to do this thing. I mean, so it's not going to be so.
The South Korean ambassador is going to be some admiral, I think. The guy was going to be, because I was at a thing for Mancow that we met some US policy lady. Anyway, she was saying that this admiral, whatever, he was a high-ranking dude, he was going to come to Australia, and then they reposted him instead to South Korea. So
there you go.
Yeah.
So it'll be someone that Donald trusts to kind of do all the things. And to be perfectly honest, if you take a look at a large part of the dysfunction as far as I can tell, in Donald Trump's regime, in the terms of like all the leaking and all of what doesn't look like a cohesive message coming from the Donald Trump regime appears to be the fact that Donald puts people into place where he trusts them, and they don't necessarily follow his vision, but at the same time, he seems to give them a lot of autonomy. So,
a lot of autonomy is one way to put it. Not really giving a crap is another way of putting it. Is how I tend to think of it.
Well,
He's like the hour of Sauron, just kind of wandering around, the landscape looking for the next shiny thing.
No, I think the difficulties.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think that the difficulty with the Trump administration has been that he's appointed people whom he initially trusts, but who don't share his vision. I don't think it's so much that or aren't willing to bullshit for him. That's the other one.
Yeah.
Like they may share his vision wholeheartedly, but they just find it hard to lie for him repeatedly.
Yeah.
In public to the cameras. And that was like his press secretaries, for example.
Yep.
And
obviously in a domestic context, that's going to be a lot harder. Like I suspect
which he's fired like a few press secretaries just because they found it so hard to repeatedly
cover up for his lies and his bluster on Twitter.
And and in terms of other stuff, I think the difference is that he's appointing people whom he trusts, but again, it's a different vision. Like Trump is this kind of old school businessman / deal maker, whereas
you can just call him what he is. He's a New York developer.
He's a New York developer, Democrat type person, and he's appointing people who just aren't that. Okay, he's appointing, whether it's his immediate family, who are these kind of idealistic Democrat type people, that's what they are, wealthy Democrats. That's his family. Then the Republican cohort he's appointing are these, standard quasi-free marketeers, socially conservative Republican types. So socially conservative Jeff Sessions is going to clash with drug laws and going to create problems and tensions for Trump there that Trump doesn't necessarily share. He's got no strong feelings one way or another. We've got, protectionists who are aligned with the Trump administration clashing with the free marketeers who are aligned with the Trump administration. Rinse and repeat in every area. I think that there's a clash brought about because Trump is all over the shop and trying to bring everyone on board.
Yep.
And not quite managing to do that.
I mean, I think for me, just to sort of slightly change the subject, one of the frustrating things with this deal, which again, I'm broadly in favor of, is just the reaction it triggers in people who then respond to each other. Like, it just becomes another... Like, I mean, this is pretty much the most important... issue in terms of sort of global politics, in terms of, like, when it comes to war in particular. I mean, obviously the US is fighting a lot of wars right now, and all of them are horrific.
I hate Trump, or I like Trump. Which is sad.
It just turns into a soccer ball that they're kicking between each other.
The core of the issue is should we make peace with North Korea?
Yeah.
Yes or no?
And how do you do it in a way that works? Rather than,
and how do you do it in a way
is Trump
that
a
works?
winner
Yes.
or is Trump a loser? Like, who gives a flying fig about that?
Yeah, correct.
Which I say totally admitting that, like, I've just spent 5 minutes previously slagging off Trump for being maybe a bit of a loser.
Sure.
But
even if, can I say this? Even if the outcome is that North Korea keeps their nukes and then sanctions are dropped and peace follows, that's actually not a bad outcome.
Yes.
That's a good outcome. It's better than the status quo, which is, tensions, war, not war. Well, it's Cold War.
Yeah.
So it is cold. That's what the North Koreans fund terrorist organizations and so on. It's war. There's no soldiers directly fighting each other, but it's war. And that's what we have now. And against that, people freely getting to know each other, realizing that North Korea's leadership is a total disaster over time, hopefully, and replacing and reforming that regime with something workable. It would be the outcome of lifting sanctions and moving forward. I think that would be a great outcome.
Yeah.
And
I was just going to say that I did a video on this topic for my YouTube channel when I was still actually doing videos for my YouTube channel. And basically, I made it after I came back from the Mont Pelerin meeting that was in South Korea last year. And unsurprisingly, this is a point where there was still a fair bit of tension. And there was a US general there, a 4-star general who used to be the commander of South Korean forces, or the US forces that are in South Korea. And I make the point that I think North Korea having nukes is not actually that much of an issue, because the chances of them using them are basically zero unless the US attacks. And that's the only condition which I can see North Korea actually using them. And that's pretty easy to avoid if you just have the US not attack them. So, if nukes mean that the North Korean regime feels safe and therefore less inclined to do something, like to strike first, in fear of being struck first, then let them have the nukes. And if South Korea and Japan feel really threatened by them, then they can have nukes too. And then everybody can have nukes and everybody can sit around and not fire them. All right.
Crossed.
Yeah, well, I don't think South Korea or Japan want war, and China doesn't want war, and I don't think North Korea wants war. So the US is the only power in the world that potentially wants war on the Korean Peninsula, because they're the only ones who are not going to be facing a completely devastating cost.
They don't have skin in the game, you say.
No. I mean, they would bleed. It would be they'd lose people. But like in terms of their own regime falling, it's not going to happen. Where everybody else has a lot more to lose.
Because you've been fairly contemplative about this. You got any final thoughts?
No, I just got bored of this topic.
Okay.
Fair enough.
Well, let's turn to other forms of authoritarianism, which is the New South Wales Police. They are now kicking people out of concerts who have done nothing wrong. Basically, at the Above and Beyond Music Festival on the weekend, they announced ahead of time that they had sniffer dogs checking people on the way in. And if the dog sat, which, as in sort of thinking it smelt drugs, the cops would reserve the right to kick you out even if they didn't find drugs on you. There was, to my knowledge, there was at least 5 people who were given one of those orders. They were given, I think it was like a 60-day ban from attending Olympic Park.
Well, to be fair, she also admitted that her housemate did drugs, and that she'd done drugs in the past. So,
I see.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, but there was a guy I heard interviewed on Triple J who had nothing, and I'm pretty sure they even strip searched him, and they still handed him a move on, like essentially a move on notice.
A move on order. Yeah. So there's a couple of issues here that you kind of need to unpack. So there was a new law passed in New South Wales that actually made all of this. So this was a new power given to them. It was just before the festival, and it had to do with I think there was a kid that died at what festival?
I can't remember. There was certainly some recent overdoses in Victoria and New South Wales.
No. This was in New South Wales last year. I think it was Splinter in the Grass or something like that. But
that
anyway,
sounds about right.
Yeah. So the result is it came out as a result of that. Largely through pushing from that kid's family, that there needs to be like more action taken to prevent drugs from coming in. So they passed a law that said, okay, you can use the sniffer dogs, and if they smell something, you can stop them from going into the actual event to prevent that, because they said, they probably have the drugs as well, to have drug-free concerts. Now, Above and Beyond, so for the other people who are in this podcast who might listen to trance and also listen to my podcast. I'm a huge fan of group therapy. They're one of the biggest trance fans in the world. And drug taking and trance kind of go together. Psychedelic experience with music that kind of matches.
Just a second.
Okay, sure. But that's funny. We're just in the middle of a podcast. But yeah. So the thing is, I know for a fact that that the effectiveness of these dogs has been, in studies that have been commissioned for this, have determined that the dogs are right about 20% of the time.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the strange thing. The data is not really on the police's side, is it? I mean, not that I've reviewed it myself, but it certainly doesn't suggest that the dogs are in any way accurate.
So
I mean,
one
the highest figure I've seen is 60%. and then the other one is 20%. And I'm like, well, neither of those is really beyond reasonable doubt.
No.
Yeah. So what I was
the police would then need to search that person at the very least to confirm their suspicions.
Well, that's what they did do, but they couldn't find anything, and it's the whole
and
point.
If you can't find anything, well, I mean, then have you actually done anything wrong? And that's the difficulty.
Yeah.
And I think this is part of the precautionary principle of better safe than sorry that is kind of sweeping the bureaucracy and the law enforcement agencies of the nation, which is if there's even a hint of wrongdoing or even the slightest evidence, it doesn't even have to have actually occurred any time at all. But just in case, we need to act in case of anything at all. And that's the mentality that is really driving this.
Yeah.
That and I think the problem is that basically, well, I mean, it means that innocent people are basically being punished for nothing.
Yeah.
For turning up without having done drugs.
So my biggest concern is actually the financial aspect, not so much the cops being right. Effectively, that's what they're being. So the fact that a cop can, turn someone away at the festival is fine. Where I get miffy about it is the fact that I've heard that these show organizers don't give back money.
No, they refunded tickets if you were found to not have drugs on you.
Interesting.
So if they searched you and they found drugs, you wouldn't get your ticket back, but you wouldn't get refunded. But they refunded everybody who was turned away from the festival but didn't have anything on them.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good. That sounds way better because when I was listening to it on Hack, it's just like, oh, they're not giving back money. I was just like, whoa, hang on. So the cops
maybe.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, though, cops move slowly, and and so do festival organisers, perhaps. And I think hearing it in the kind of the days of the immediate aftermath that the money hasn't been returned might be different from what Lee's saying, which is that later on the money was returned.
I mean, presumably they just refund it like they would if you showed up and asked for a refund. They probably just did it that way. So I mean, I'm not sure the exact thing. I imagine they just refund it like any other retailer would.
So you're speculating.
Yes. I mean, this is from hearing from. I think it must have been yesterday on Hack. It was an interview with a guy. Like it was at the festival. They were interviewing people, and he said that he had his money refunded. So.
That's good because I heard it on Hack as well.
Yeah.
And they were getting up in arms about them not getting their money back.
Oh, okay.
So
I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I mean, I actually think that's the least of the issues. I mean, so for me, this reminds me very much of the policy.
These people aren't
sure,
money.
yeah, but in terms of violating your rights whenever they want, leaving aside the effectiveness of the dogs, there's also the issue of essentially dogs being used as a pretext. So this is the other thing. So particularly if you look at the US, because I mean, I guess in the US, there's actually lots of organizations that really focus on this sort of stuff. If you read Reason magazine like I do, you'll see that essentially the US Supreme Court has given more or less cops carte blanche authority to search cars because of sniffer dogs. And essentially the sniffer dogs are used, they just get the dogs to sit down and then, we have a pretext to search your car. And then civil assets forfeiture kicks in and then all sorts of other things kick in. Even when, you don't, would otherwise be fine.
I thought the US was going in the opposite direction.
No. If the dog sits down, they can search your car. So, and there's actually tellingly, there's a very interesting video that was floating around on the sort of, video the cop types Facebook pages of a cop that was obviously trying to get the dog to sit down. And then when the dog doesn't, he yanks the dog's collar, pissed off, clearly showing that in my view, that he was looking for that pretext and the dog didn't give it to him and he got pissed off and, yanked the dog's collar. Obviously, really yanked the dog's collar. It's not just a little bit. That's the bigger issue. Particularly in this, so let me just quickly finish. Particularly in how this could be expanded So that's the other thing. They're using it on drugs at festivals right now, but why not use it on cars? Why not use it on any situation where the cops want a pretext to search people and they just get the dog to sit down? And dogs are trained to respond to humans. They don't know what they're doing. They're not conscious, I'm looking for drugs. They're just used to getting cues from their handlers. And if the dogs are trained to get cues from their handlers and they act on demand, well, then you essentially have a moving, walking pretext to search anybody for any reason. And yeah, 99% of the time you're not going to find anything, but in that 1%, you create all sorts of problems. And it's through violating people's rights. So, go Zeev.
What I would add to that is, I don't know about 99% or what the correct figure is, but apart from that, because you mentioned that you thought that the reforms were moving in the other direction, or rather the US was moving in the other direction. You're both right. But the US is moving in the other direction, some states, from where Lee is saying. So Lee's statement is the starting point of a fairly draconian state of things, but there's been pushback now, which is kind of winding back what Lee is talking about, at least in terms of civil forfeiture.
Right.
So, but yeah, so you're kind of both right, I think, from what I've read from the Institute for Justice or Institute of Justice think tank, which does a lot of work on this area. There's been a fair amount of reform of civil forfeiture laws, at least. So, fingers crossed, guys. Maybe it'll improve.
So the case I was thinking of that really opened the door for this sort of stuff is Florida versus Harris, which basically says so the holding is if a bona fide organization has certified a dog after testing its reliability in a controlled setting, or if the dog has recently successfully completed a training program, essentially you can't challenge the fact that the dog is unreliable.
Yeah, that's cause for suspicion or something.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's go on, Vikas.
Yeah, so it was actually the conversation. So the article that I got it from was from the conversation, and they said there's a spectrum of studies that they've done in terms of the effectiveness of the sniffer dogs.
Yeah.
At the bottom end, they found 20%, and at the top end, they found 40%. Now these are academic studies. There is a mention of some police studies which have 60%, but then again, that's a police study, and it's based on what they found, right? What they actually found on the field, right? As opposed to in actual controlled condition. So see, here's the thing. I think controlled tests are always better than the field tests that they talk about, because you might have just happened to find a really good sample that happened to have 60% drugs. But if you're doing
maybe.
Yeah.
And also there's that element of dogs picking up on suspicious behavior generally, perhaps, which is a little different to dogs picking up on drugs as such. So maybe it's behavioral too.
Correct, which is what they're testing for. So sniffer dogs, effectively, by the range of studies that have been done on it, not that effective. In fact, you're probably better off pointing at someone and flipping a coin, because that gives you at least 50% likelihood of being correct.
Yeah, but dogs are cute. So clearly that totally makes them like more reliable as diviners of criminal intent.
Come on, those beagles that the Border Force has. I mean, my goodness. Yeah. Who are you to turn those beagles?
Exactly. Come on, Vikas.
See, what the thing is, I actually suspect that dogs can sniff these drugs. I think they actually probably can. I think it's where it gets muddied is the way that we treat the dogs, right? Because they're effectively trying to communicate with what they're, the way we interpret what they're signaling is maybe hit and miss.
Well, there's also the extent to which you could pick up a trace of drugs on your person just by brushing against somebody who maybe smoked weed recently, or if you handle money, or anything like that. So I mean, that's the other issue is dogs don't know. Oh, you've picked this smell up because of, you've handled a $20 note. They just, you've got the smell. Okay, I'm going to sit down, and that's kind of the end of it. So it's.
They ever think to themselves, someday I'm going to be discussing sniffer dogs. It's like,
so I think we've gone way past the 30.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
For the episode.
yeah, I think that's it for
we're
this
gonna
week.
do it.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Cool. All right. Thanks everybody for joining us. We'll be back again next week with more discussion. Oh, and we're gonna have an after episode talking about E3 because Vikas and I like talking about games, and we're gonna do it what we like because it's our show.
Cool.
Thanks everybody for joining us. Like, share, subscribe, Facebook,
Excellent.
YouTube.
Yeah.